Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to create user-created functions in PHP. So a little bit of syntax, a little bit of what you can do with them. So creating functions, the syntax couldn't be a whole lot more simplified. It's quite simply, it's just keyword function, then you need to come up with a function name. So I'm not going to go over too much detail here, but same kind of rules you would apply to variables. They should start with letters, they shouldn't contain special characters. So like I'll call this one hello. And then the next part is what you call the parameters. You may have parameters, you may not. If I just write empty quotes like that, that means, or sorry, empty parentheses, that means that there are no parameters. Open curly brace, close curly brace. So I've created a function called hello with no parameters. What does it do? Well, I don't know. Let's see. So if a function, so some functions return values, some don't. In some languages, they might call them void functions if they don't return something. But I'm going to just put a return statement. So a return statement is what happens when the function is done. So I'm just going to have it return a string, and it's going to say, hello world. Right? Like that's the easiest function you could ever write. So every time you call this thing, it's going to return something called hello world. The thing about functions is they don't do anything until you call them. And if I call this function, I would like to have some output. So I'm going to say echo whatever this hello function returns. Right? So I'm saying echo out whatever that thing returns. And that thing returns a string saying hello world. If I save that and I refresh this page, you'll see it'll say hello world. If you view the page source, there's nothing to see. There's just whatever that thing echoed out. That's the most basic function I could show you. Let's kind of keep this thing moving along a little bit. So let's do one with a parameter. So let's say that I want this thing to say like hello Ken or hello Dave or hello Sarah or whatever the heck you want to pass to it. So if I wanted that to happen, in other words, I want this to not just do the same exact thing every time. I want it to be able to kind of be customized, if you will. Then that sounds like I probably need a parameter. So I need to define a local variable within the context of this function. I'm just going to call it like nm, right? Short for name. And instead of hello world, I'm going to say hello nm. Notice I'm referencing a variable name in a return. This only works because I'm using double quotes. And then if I try and call the function right now, it's not going to work because there is no function called hello without parameters. However, if I pass it something like if I pass it a string or I pass it any kind of an argument, it's going to get stored as nm locally, and then it's going to get spit out right here. Right? This shouldn't be the first time you've seen functions. If it is, this is probably pretty obscure to you. But functions is something that takes a little bit of time to learn. Just showing you the syntax for PHP and just giving you a brief kind of overview. And you'll notice that parameter got used. So another kind of tricky part about this discussion is up here where I'm defining my function, I call it a parameter, and when I'm passing it, I call it an argument. Right? So arguments, parameters kind of mean the same thing, but they're used in different contexts. Let me show you a different function. So say I want to do another function. That's a silly function. The weird thing about teaching people about functions is you always want to start simple, or I do at least. And when I do such simple functions, people don't understand the utility of them, and that's the right idea. But I'm telling you, when your programs get more complicated and they get bigger, you're going to need functions. So that's why it's weird and awkward to have a tiny program like this with functions. But in the long run, you're going to need to know how to use these and how to create your own. So let's say I want to create another function. This one's going to be a little bit more useful. So I'm going to call it headliner. And so what this function is going to do is you're going to pass it some text, and it's going to return that text formatted or wrapped in h1 tags. Right? That's a reasonable thing. So that, like I said, you're going to pass it some text. So I need to give it a parameter. And I'm going to say this thing is going to return, like I said, it's going to be h1 formatted text. So I'm going to put an h1 in there, opening and closing. And then in the middle there, I'm going to put the text. This actually has some value. And so when you are creating functions, which are frequently used and just kind of used to expedite what you're doing, common tasks, we oftentimes call these helper functions. You can imagine you might create your own library of helper functions to just make yourself a more efficient programmer. And if I want to call that thing, so I'll say echo headliner, and I need to pass it some text. And if I call it, I should get hello world wrapped in h1 tags. And there's that. If I right click and view the page source, you can see, there's no line breaks, which is pretty annoying, but you can see that these things are doing what they are supposed to be doing. So those are functions, and specifically that one right there, I wouldn't hesitate to call that a helper function. It's a simple function, but it's used to carry out common tasks that I use all the time, and so it's smart. You can end up saving yourself some time in the long run by creating useful functions that you're going to use again and again and again. Creating a function like this that you're not going to use repeatedly is a waste of time, but when you start creating functions which can actually do some useful tasks, that's when you start getting some value out of them. I'm going to talk more about helper functions in the future, but for now, this is the basics of functions in PHP. Thanks for watching.